This episode contains discussions surrounding mental health. If at any point during the episode you or someone you know is in need of support, call 988 or visit iasp.info for help. Welcome back once again, everybody, to yet another episode of the Make Mental podcast. Thank you for choosing us consistently throughout the last year and a handful of days here. I can't believe I've said we're in existence for a year. And the guests, they just keep presenting themselves to us, and it's exciting that there's enough people that want to speak on this topic. Obviously, it's very important to a lot of people, but I think society as a whole right now. And we're very fortunate enough to have Nicholas Davis on the podcast. Whenever you listen to it, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, we hope you enjoy what he has to say. So thank you for joining us, Nick, to share this space and really dive into mental health and even what you've got going on, because you've got some pretty exciting things we'll get into.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's an awesome project, and I can't believe it's already been a year. That is a great accomplishment. So congratulations to you with that.
Well, thank you. And well, I guess we'll just jump right into your Mend the Mind, because it'll be a year before you know it as well. I swear it goes by so quick, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's been a wonderful project, a lot of learning, a lot of growth, a lot of personal development from the stories of the individuals we've had on, from the people they're representing. We've had some wonderful people representing some individuals who have lost the battle to suicide, unfortunately, and they're living out their mission in honor of those people. And it just, as much as my heart breaks every single time we hear one of those stories, obviously I learn so much, and the pure strength of those people is just incredible, and their families. So it's the guests that make it possible. But Mend the Mind for you, a new exciting podcast. I know we've kind of been in touch on social media, and obviously through my brother Jake, mutual friends, but we haven't really caught up in a while. I think the last time was in another guest's basement, Mike Fenskin. I mean, a little random connection. Once you kind of get in the world of mental health and just health in general, you don't realize how many people in your life are into that as well. But it's exciting. So can you walk us through Mend the Mind a little bit, and maybe we'll go reverse order. We'll start with what you got going on and then how you got there.
Yeah, definitely. So Mend the Mind is another podcast that we had started. It's me and my buddy Mike Hall. He was my manager down at Fleet Feet in Tallahassee for my grad school, and he ran for Florida State. And what I love about Mike is he's very to the point, and very good at putting things in terms that are just easy to understand. And so I picked up a lot of things from him at Fleet Feet and in life in general. And I was like, Mike, how would you like to start a podcast? We had a different coworker that wanted to produce a podcast for a little bit. And so the stars aligned, and we've been going. I think we've got 15 episodes recorded, but we have released 3. We tried to get a little bit of a stockpile going. But the whole idea is just to take someone's passion. So like you do, if we have a guest and the guest has something they're super into or a topic that we think might be fit for them, we'll have them on, dive into the topic and the ins and outs of that, and then how can we apply that to our own lives and get a little bit better through it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic concept, and I think the intentionality, again, we talk about that a lot over here at Make Mental, but the intentionality of the guest and the topic. You're not just going to ask someone on who, there's a chance they might know and want to talk about this topic. You're like, nope, we know they're an expert or an aspiring expert in this field. Let's pick their brain. And I know you personally, to know you take some stuff away from it, but it's just that little step further that I think will go a long way in the lives of many people. Whether it's 5 people that listen to any given podcast, not just yours or mine, or 500, right? If one person walked up to you or to someone else and spread a message through the work that you're doing, then that's enough to keep going forward. But I love the attention to detail. I've listened to the first 3 episodes myself. Very, very similar to our podcast, kind of just conversational. Wherever it takes you is where it takes you. But have you always wanted to do a podcast, or is it, like you said, something in the last few years once you kind of got to know Mike a little more and you were just like, what the hell, let's do it?
Definitely closer to the second. I think that I like the topics, but going out and starting my own project where we are the voice of the topics was never in the cards for me until it suddenly was. Um, been working a lot on kind of accepting what is in my control and what's not in my control. And I would say in the past, a lot of the things with that might be I can't really control what other people think, and I was a lot more focused on that in like high school or in college, and now it's kind of more about the journey of having those conversations, gaining that perspective from other people, and focusing on that has made it much easier to get in front of the camera and the mic.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it is very nerve wracking when you all of a sudden become the voice for such important topics, sometimes such confusing topics. I mean, the world of mental health and physical health in general is just a giant minefield, really. Like you're navigating it, and all of a sudden you step on a mine, and then you just go down this spiral of like, oh my god, did I say something? Did I accidentally trigger somebody? Did I trigger myself? Like the anxiety loop comes back up a lot. But I think the more you can accept that, hey, I've chosen to take this path. Let's not worry about if it's right. Let's make it right. I think that's what's very exciting about what you're doing over at Mend the Mind. And I know you studied, I guess, sports psychology in college. That sounds exciting to me. I don't dislike my major of business. I loved getting a master's in business administration, double minoring in psych and English. But I really wish, and maybe it's in the cards. Who knows? I don't know what the future holds. To go back and do more with psychology. Um, Walk us through that, because that it seems like psychology often gets a bad rep of being the easy major at the school. Oh, you want to go to college, do psychology, it's easy, whatever. But I think that might be business. I think we all have you guys fooled. I think business was a pretty stinking easy major. But walk us through the ins and outs of sports psychology, and maybe what you learned about yourself through that journey, because I know you've had quite the growth journey yourself throughout your time at college.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the interest came from wanting to understand what was or wasn't working with myself. And so when I was at Rochester for undergrad, I struggled a lot with the expectations I would set for myself as a runner and then falling short over and over again. And it really wore on me. And I knew that, for instance, self talk was one of my worst ones. If I was in a race, mile 3, mile 4, I'm in my own head talking about how much better everyone else around me is, even though we're all doing the same thing, did similar trainings, kind of just beat myself up. And so I took a class on motivation, and it had a heavy emphasis on how do we apply these psych articles and principles to life. What does it look like, and what in theory would it drive? And through trying it out in those applications, it started working for me, and I fell in love with it. And that's when I started looking at sports psych. And since, I would say, I mean, I'm not super competitive with running these days, but even on the runs, I'm a lot kinder to myself. And it's really opened the world of how can I not only get better, but how can I encourage other people to get better too? Because I think it is a common struggle.
Yeah, and I'm very fascinated with this area myself. Obviously, as a former athlete, and like you said, I'm not myself in the competitive field of soccer or football anymore. If you're listening over in Europe, but I think, and as much as COVID sucked for people, I think it put things into perspective for an equal amount of people, and it's hard to have, or to have on your conscience that the worst time in someone's life could have been the best in yours. But again, that goes back to, that's not in your sphere of control. You couldn't plan for COVID. I'm just using you as an example, kind of through myself. It's like, hey, my friend is going through this. Can you give me some advice? That's the scenario we're playing here inadvertently. But um, I guess I'll just speak directly about myself. For me, it was a very shitty experience. I will say that it was tough to have a sport that you've played for X amount of years ripped away from you, your built-in family at college. Whether you played a sport or not, you were kind of just isolated to your floor if you lived in the dorm, to your house, to your roommate, even sometimes to yourself if you caught it. So that theory of isolation, which again we can go into because I'm curious about your thoughts on that. That's a whole, we could do like 8 different podcasts, and that's what I love about this. But to circle back here, the worst time of someone's life can be the best time of your life. Has that ever resonated with you? Because, like I said, for me, as much as COVID stunk, I did a lot of self discovery and felt like I really came into my own, started to enjoy the journey, didn't really focus on the results as much, and then they still seemed to come. Is the emphasis of, or I guess the parallel of struggle and victory sit with you at all?
Definitely. I think it's one fascinating that you almost have to have two things for one to exist, right? The whole dichotomy of, success. Could you have success if there isn't failure as well? Like if everything was success, would it even be success? That's always kind of a fun concept. But especially when you talk about one person's best day, another person's worst day, any of our best days was someone's worst day. Any of their best days might have been our worst day. And so that's super interesting. And it's one of the topics that we actually focus on a little bit at work too. This idea of mental agility, or being able to take others' perspectives. And I think the better we get at that, the more we can kind of, choose the perspective that works a little bit better for us. Um, the extremes of that, right? If you're just giving, 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 that's really good, but it can be tiresome. Similarly, if you're taking, 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 that can be really beneficial to you, but how many friends are you going to make along the way? It's kind of a fun extreme, and that's not to say you're, going to go to one extreme necessarily, but every single kind of decision you have, are you leaning one way or another? Which I think is kind of cool, because I think taking perspectives really opens the door for a lot of positive things to happen in life. The better you can do that, the more mindful you can be of others and yourself, more opportunities you give yourself to choose what's going to work best for you.
Go Global is a free-flowing technology company that handcrafts, embellishes, and manufactures garments and accessories. Designed on the principles of people, places, and possibilities, Go Global reimagines fashion and is inspired by you, the people of the world. Yeah, and that's such a cool, almost half space to exist in. Um, I always go back to, in my own head, like the weird state of consciousness you're in when you're like half asleep, but you're really not. And for me, at least last night, it was ridiculously windy. I feel like I have like recency bias in every single thing I do, and that's one of my flaws that I'm working on. But I just try and make it relatable to myself, and then if it sits with someone else, cool. But last night I was up visiting my grandparents in Oswego, and I stayed overnight, and it was just crazy the amount of wind that was coming off Lake Ontario. And for those who aren't familiar with upstate New York geography, Canada's on the other side of Lake Ontario, so just a big open water. You can mistake it as the ocean if you're in the right spot because you can't see the other side. Um, but the wind that was coming off that, and it was like midnight. I was trying to go to bed on time, but the wind was so loud that every time I was getting ready to fall asleep, I swear the room was shaking. Like I swear I was just like, "Oh my god, what is going on?" Like, but then I would fall back into that state of, I don't even know what sleep cycle that is. Maybe you do, but it was just like I was here, like I knew the wind was going, but I still felt rested. I wonder, is there a danger of falling into, when you relate it back to our topic here, the understanding that your best day it could be someone else's, that empathy basically, is there such thing for you, because I know there is for me at least, toxic empathy where you can understand where someone else is coming from, so much so that you forget where you come from yourself? And what role do you think that plays into sports psych?
So I think that's an interesting question. I think there is a dark side to most strengths. I'll use humor for example. Being funny, typically a good thing, but there are certain situations where being funny isn't the best. You probably don't want to be making jokes in divorce court or something like
Hmm.
that. Like, there's a downside of that. You can overuse it. Similarly, empathy is something that can be really helpful, but it can also have a big, big downside if you're so focused on everyone else and taking a day in their shoes that you're not attuned to your own needs. And I think with the sleep example, it's a good one where one of the hardest things that we can all do is finding the good in something like that. There's a there's a lot of ways you can view a lot of things, right? One common example might be, and I love this one, our good friend Matt Rank. When we would go road trip in the past, we would be driving on the highway and there would be a car that doesn't use their blinker and there'd be cars that do use their blinker. And we used to always, at the start, point out the ones who didn't use their blinkers. And we'd be like, oh, great, that was real nice, like good driving, right? And then we started to flip that. And so it's the same scenario. We're in the car, but now we're calling out the cars who are using their blinker. And we're focusing more on the positive there. Or even if somebody doesn't use their blinker, maybe if Matt's driving, I'm like, hey, Matt, that's a phenomenal job giving them space. Like, I love how you handled that defensive driving. And so we tried to flip the focus to something that would be a little bit more positive. Um, I don't know what it would be sleeping in the room. It's it's a little bit tougher when that one sounds like a more rough experience, but I think it does paint that picture
Yeah.
that can you find good in whatever it is.
Yeah, I think now that I think about it, to relate it to the room, instead of panicking, being like, oh my God, I'm not getting to sleep, the wind is too
Mm-hmm.
loud, this, that. Well, I can be aware that the wind is loud. I can be aware that I have and am blessed enough to have a roof over my head and four walls to protect me from it. And if I lay here long enough, my body will put itself to sleep. Right. I think that's eventually how I got myself to go to sleep now that we're kind of reaching that conclusion. I could have, like you said at the beginning, pointed out the fact that it was so windy. Like, I should have stayed home. I could have got a better sleep at home. Blah. Like, I could have noticed and went down such a negative path. But instead, and I guess that just comes with a lot of practice and training, I was able to tell myself, like, dude, you got 3 warm blankets. So if the roof does fly off and for whatever crazy scenario, you're going to be warm. I mean, I just go to extreme and you'll fall asleep eventually. Like, at least you have a bed and you're not outside right now. Because there are some people that are, again, to bring it back to our worst day and best day scenario. But I do appreciate that your point of view on the blinker, because I think it's one thing to empathy is important. You can't just walk around without empathy. I mean, you could. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you can't, but I don't I don't advise it, right? I think you
Right.
need a certain level of empathy, but if you have too much empathy, you lose reality for yourself, and that could do more harm for yourself and others than the opposite. So to break that down, after I just went through some alphabet soup there, if you're, I don't know, if you're the captain of your team and you notice a player isn't getting a lot of play time, you could try to help them, be conscious that they're not getting a lot of playing time, and say, hey, maybe if you improve XYZ, you might get a shot. Right? I'm not the coach, I can't promise more. You have to, again, put it into perspective. Everything we're talking about is kind of intertwined, and that's what makes mental health so confusing, so scary, so obscure, if you will. But if you're willing to navigate it with us, we'll help you as best we can through it. But if you're that leader on your sports team and you're like, man, I know this kid deserves a chance, he's not getting it, or she's not getting it, they're not getting it, how can I help them? And do all that you can to help them. If it's not working, you can no longer focus your energy solely on helping them get playtime. What can you do? Okay, they're not getting on the field. Let me make sure they're getting the best experience at practice. So that way my level doesn't drop. Because if your level drops on the field because you're focusing too much on someone else, then you're hurting the team as a whole. And if you're an individual sport, you almost have to look at yourself as the teammate, kind of like you in running, right? I'm at mile 5. I'm beating myself up. Okay, I know I'm going to beat myself up at mile 5. Let's wait until mile 8 to beat myself up. All right. Maybe you can speak a little bit more on an individual sport. Is there things you can do? Because you can have empathy for yourself, as bizarre as that sounds. Is there things you can do in an individual sport or scenario, kind of like my example, to combat that empathy you would feel for yourself, but still be aware of it because you don't want to dismiss it completely?
I think yes. I'm gonna try to answer this. Let me know if it hits the point or not. But I think one of the biggest things with individual sports is that social comparison piece and the realization that my day one next to somebody else's day 5 is not the same thing, right? Like if you walk into the gym, you go into training, it's your first year on a team in college, and you're comparing yourself to a junior. It's not really fair to yourself. And so growth ultimately comes from you being better than the you that you were last time. And so it's a huge emphasis to, if you want to compare to other people, you can, but it has to be a comparison from you first. And then you can kind of see where you're at. But it's also beneficial to use that as a learning or informational piece of comparison with other people rather than tearing yourself down or building yourself up based on other people's valuation of you. And I think that's a really big one. I also think, to your point, as a leader, you can impact your own wellness. You can also impact your teammates' wellness. Which is better? Entirely dependent. But is it more beneficial sometimes to get everyone 10% better? Maybe it's a team meeting or some impactful message that you want to push out and really hype people up before a game. Or in other times, is it more beneficial, and especially in individual sports, to really lock yourself in? There were times in cross country where it was more of this, I need to lock in and focus on me and make sure that I'm ready for today because my head's not in the right spot. But there were also times where the positivity was contagious from the teammates, even in an individual sport. I can think of like one example. It's our hardest workouts. There was one guy on our team that was a year above me. He would just scream, I love running as loud as he could on the last rep, just middle of the run. And that would get the whole team to start saying, I love running. And suddenly we're revitalized with energy. And so that's an example where him, focusing on all of us as a leader and a captain really had a positive impact for everybody.
Empire Specialty Printing is a family owned and operated screen printing and promotional products company. ESP has been in business for over a decade by providing consistent and high quality service. Products include custom hoodies, shirts, hats, business supplies, and much, much more. Whether it's for a family party, school team, group, or corporate apparel, Empire Specialty Printing has what you need to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is known as the Pareto principle, if anyone's familiar with that. 80% of your results come from 20% of your focus.
Okay.
And as simple as it sounds, you can break that into people. If you have 10 people in a room and you want to be successful, it's impossible to give 100% to all 10 people at the same time. It's just the person who figures it out. It might be Elon Musk. I have no idea. The person who figures it out. And I'd argue he didn't even figure it out. But the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, is, like I said, 80% of your results, 20% of your focus. If you want to push weight at the gym and you on a bench press, right? You're going to spend 20% of your time doing bench to work out the big muscles, but you still have to make sure your fitness doesn't drop. You still have to make sure the small muscles are going to work. You still have to feed yourself, right? There's so much other things you have to do, but 80% of your focus, or 20% of your focus, is going to be on that pushing the bench. I think that can be applied to life, to sports, to business, to personal development, to anything. You figure out what you want to do and you give 80% or 20% effort into that thing, then you're already 80% there. And you got to kind of sit with that concept for a second to let it make sense. Even as I stumble over it now, it makes sense in my head. Coming out, it's not. But does that rule sit with you at all, or do you believe that you can put more effort in to something else to still get the same amount?
I think anytime you start stretching yourself too thin, you start to fringe on the potential for burnout. And I think that's a serious issue. Is there's two ways that I want to go with it. The first one would be, I've got a buddy who loves the basics. Like, he just rinse and repeat. He's in the gym early every morning. He goes on his runs, and that brings him joy. And what brings him joy about it is the consistency. He thinks self-discipline is one of the most important things for him. And so one of his bigger talking points is always this idea of simple but repeated tasks drive these great big outcomes. Again, you're not going to get to your end goal by putting in a lot of work on one day. It's going to be a little work on a lot of days. And so that kind of sounds like that 80-20 principle. And the other one in a similar light is, I'm a huge Kobe Bryant fan. And from a sports psych perspective, what I think is so interesting about him is he loved what he did. And that's why he did it. But a lot of times the Mamba mentality is portrayed as, you just have to grind. You've got to be obsessed. It's this unhealthy, toxic obsession. It's like the only reason that worked for Kobe is because he enjoyed what he did. If you just want the end goal, but you don't like what's taking you to the end goal, you're probably not going to reach it. If you do, you'll be it's not going to be as satisfying once you get there. You'll kind of quit the behaviors that led to it, and then we're, regressing again.
Is it possible, and again, it's kind of an opinion question, but we'd like to get yours. Is it possible to train yourself to appreciate the journey if you don't enjoy it at this point? So say, I hate the word chasing happiness, but it seems to be like a hot topic. Everyone wants to be happy, successful, rich. Like that's just the way it goes. Say, just for all intents and purposes, you want to get $100, but you don't want to work the 8-hour shift for your
Yeah.
$100. Um, Pretty good hourly rate there if you think about it. Besides the point,
Yeah.
is it possible to train yourself to say, "Hey, I know what my end goal is. I really hate this process. Like it sucks, but can I fall into the routine and learn to appreciate it?"
Yeah, definitely. I think you can, and I think it takes a little bit of a mindset shift, like you've mentioned a little bit earlier. But there's different sources that you can pull on for motivation, and this is what honestly my favorite topic. But you can pull on reward and punishment. If you just want the $100, somebody's going to give you $100 to do it. Maybe that gets you through that 8-hour shift. You can also pull on, well, it's my responsibility to be at work. If I don't show up, I'm going to feel super guilty. Or I want to be able to, at the end of the day, say that I worked 8 hours and got $100. That shame, guilt, ego involvement, you're doing things for pride or that social comparison. Those ones tend to be a little bit weaker, but they will get you to do something. It's not to say it's not motivation. It 100% works. Does it work over time? You see more mixed results. And then slowly as you go up towards like that gold standard of intrinsic motivation, which some things is just really hard to get to given the task. And so if you don't enjoy the process, how do you get a little bit better? Valuing the kind of end goal would be the next one. And so if you think that $100 is beneficial and you understand that the work that you're doing will lead to the $100 and you're internalizing that a little bit more rather than just for the $100, that's another step forward. You kind of understand the meaning and the importance of what it is. And then the last one before intrinsic would be, this is who I am. This is what I do, right? If I am a hard worker and there is an 8-hour shift to be done, I'm going to do that because I identify as somebody who works hard, and this falls in line with that. And that's where self-discipline gets really interesting, because if you are a very disciplined person, even the things you don't enjoy a lot of, if you can tie it to your value of self-discipline, you're going to be better off doing it. And so a lot of the ways that people move up that continuum are raising awareness and understanding. And so if I'm a parent and I just tell my kids who, you're playing baseball, every time you get a home run, I'm going to give you $5, right? They're going to hit some home runs. That's going to work. But what happens when I take away the $5? Are you still going to like baseball if we've been doing it for years? Research would suggest the answer is not as much. But if I can, even with $5, I'm still giving $5. If you understand why the $5 is coming and the importance of that process that leads to that outcome, and I'm giving rationale for why home runs are good and what practicing strategies are awesome, and I'm hyping you up along the way rather than just giving you $5, you might see a little bit more enjoyment in it. And so by raising that in understanding, or by leveraging kind of your values as an individual, again, you could be a hard worker, you could be, I am an athlete, this is what an athlete does. Whatever it is that you identify as, things like that will guide you kind of towards more enjoyment on that process.
Totally, yeah. I love that. That did hit the nail on the head. There's two ways I want to go with this, and I'd like to go both ways if you'll bear with me. The first is intrinsic and extrinsic values and rewards. And I think you were kind of getting there, mentioned it a little bit, but you need both. And that's what's, again, I say it all the time, that's what's so tricky about mental and physical health is you need to understand that you need to think about yourself, but you need to think about others. You need external things to happen, but you also need internal things to happen. You need good timing. You need pretty stinking shitty timing. I mean, both need to happen. How do we enjoy that process? Because I think in a world where everything is instant, everyone's posting their success. Some people are posting their failures, which is fine. I'm not going to, it's to each their own. But more so, you only hear success, success, success. You could be scrolling across an Instagram page and see someone post a story, 6 figures, whatever it is, and not realize that it took them 20 years to do it. You don't get that background. How do you, again, all of this is going back to personal value. How do you learn to just slow down, appreciate the external wins and losses, as well as appreciating and understanding that you're going to have some internal ones, some internal battles as well?
Yeah, I think it goes a lot to where you derive value from. And so the idea of aspirations and goals drive behavior. They motivate you. There are different types of goals, and the motivation that you experience along the way does play into this. Um, they did an interesting study at Rochester with college graduates. When they graduated, they asked them, like, what are your goals? Um, they kind of rated them whether they were extrinsic or intrinsic aspirations and goals. They had them fill out, like, what does your mental health look like in terms of self-esteem, and like mental wellness outcomes, and then some illness outcomes too. So if your self-esteem is lower, or if you're experiencing burnout, stress, things like that, and also physical symptoms. What does your physical health look like? They waited 2 years and they followed up, and they basically wanted to know, where are you at? Are you achieving these goals? What are your current goals like? What is your mental and physical health again? And what they found was both groups made the same amount of objective progress. And so towards their goal, you made progress, you made the same amount of progress, you're doing good, right? But the difference between the two was the extrinsic group. So your money, fame, fortune, like reward, reputation, things like that, did not experience the same kind of feeling that they were moving towards that goal. They thought they were in the same spot. Once they made the 80 grand, they wanted 100 grand, and that goal just kept pushing up and up. Whereas people who had more intrinsic aspirations, like finding connection, general health, if that was an aspiration for them, and things that are inside themselves, um, they felt like they were a lot closer to their goals, and therefore their satisfaction with life, happiness, self-esteem, all of that was a little bit higher. And so that's not to say don't have extrinsic goals. You need money to live. That's ridiculous to say just get rid of it. Like you said, like both are going to be applicable, but the degree to which that you can find and understand what the value in things are, understand what the processes are when it is external, is huge. Because there's a difference between I want to make 100,000 and I want to make 100,000 because I want to be able to support my family and have leisurely time to spend with loved ones. And so that's kind of what maybe some of the research would pull. And there's also an element to that motivation in general. Where is the control coming from? Do you have control over the situation? To the degree that you think that your behaviors directly influence outcomes, you are acting in a more internal or intrinsic way. Whereas if you don't think that your actions and behaviors will make a difference, you have less of that. And then you get into extrinsic. And then the ultimate version of that is amotivation, where destiny and fate control anything. I don't have any control. And that tends to be with really bad like health outcomes.
Need a tow? Top Shot Transport is the place to go. From cars to machinery, heavy equipment to general freight, Top Shot Transport will give you the best rate. Top Shot Transport is fully licensed and ready to tow your stuff anywhere. Email topshottransport1@gmail.com for more information.
Yeah, and again, probably a very horrible generalization, but that could lead to some pretty bad laziness if you think I can't control anything. I'm just going to go about my life. Like, it's kind of mopey. And again, not everyone. There are some people who have found success in that. But if you look at just a simple, completely oversimplified version, it could tend to go towards laziness, poor mental health outcomes, poor physical health outcomes. And you can dig yourself out of those. It's just a heck of a lot more work. It's not impossible. But if you catch yourself before you get too far down that path, who knows? I mean, we encourage over here at Make Mental, I'm sure at Mend the Mind as well, that you catch yourself before you get too far. But there are avenues to and other podcasts and physical resources to help you get further out of that. The further down you slide, obviously the higher you have to climb. Right now, Make Mental and Mend the Mind can only help you get probably halfway up the ladder. You're going to have to do the rest on your own. But I don't know if in your study that you were talking about, if they talked about like cognitive mapping or success mapping. I find that area very fascinating. There was a study done. I can't remember who did it. You're just going to have to take my word that it was someone important. They mapped out what success looked like for them in like a couple different degrees. One was monetary, one was health and wellness, and then one was just pure happiness, which I think is health and wellness. But again, it's objective. And then the second one they did was the complete opposite. In 5 years, what does failure look like for you? And they found that when you map out both, you're more likely to hit the goals of your happiness, your mental health and physical wellness, and your monetary success. I find that very interesting because if you only see success, like you said, you need that knowledge of failure. Like, in order for success to exist, failure has to exist. And whatever that definition is, like, your failure could have been 80 grand of the 100 grand. Okay, that's pretty stinking good. You're 80% successful. Like, that's pretty good ratio. I just find it fascinating that the study group that mapped out both versus one or the other did astronomically better than those other two. Is it because when you can understand what could go wrong, you're more motivated to do what could go right? I mean, you'd think that if you didn't know what failure was, you your only path was success because you don't know how to reach that failure. What is that all about? Because that fascinates me.
So, a couple of different avenues. I think understanding is always central to me. I think the more you understand, the better. It's just a general principle. But specifically with failure, opposite being success. Are you familiar with Project Aristotle?
Very, very vaguely, just the name. So enlighten me.
So Google ran a study in 2016, I think. Don't quote me on that, but they ran a study and they said, what makes businesses successful? It was a huge study. They had, I think, over 150 businesses in it, and they wanted to see what factors drive success in a team and in an office environment. I think these translate really well to sport as well. But the biggest couple that they found, number one, was psychological safety by a long shot. And so that was massive. And then accountability was another piece, or dependability. And they had some other ones, really, really fascinating article itself. But they found that those drive success in teams. And one of the big pieces with psychological safety and developing this culture of trust is a failure-based environment. And that's not saying try ridiculous things. There's a difference between an intelligent failure and a failure. If you're rock climbing and you throw yourself at the wall and just bounce off, that's not an intelligent failure, right? That probably
Well,
didn't
you'll
think about
succeed
that.
at failing, so
Yeah. Whereas, if you're trying to climb the wall and you've got a plan and it just doesn't work, that's a little bit more of an intelligent failure. The degree to which you are okay and accepting of the failure and use it as learning opportunities is kind of the idea of how failure-based learning, or how promoted is it in that environment. And so there's a really cool TED Talk specifically on failure-based learning. I think it's by Mark something. He's a super big YouTuber, does a bunch of science experiments, but the title of the TED Talk is The Super Mario Effect. How he pitches it, which is one of my favorite examples, I think, in any TED Talk, is when you played Mario when you were a kid, or when you played video games when you were a kid, how you get better at the game is by failing in a way. And that doesn't mean you go into school and you start talking about the failures. You usually talk about how well you were doing. But what drives that success is how many green shells you take in Mario, or how many pipes you fell down, how many times Bowser got you. And you don't get deterred by those failures. Whereas sometimes in sports or things that are more of a social sphere, we sit on those failures and we try to avoid those failures rather than learn from them. And so if I'm getting feedback from my coach on what went well or what didn't go well, and I'm viewing this as, again, shots to my kind of self-identity and value, that's not going to go super well. But if I'm taking his feedback as things that I can work on and ways that I can improve, that's going to go a little bit better for me. And so a lot of times when you map out with a success map, not super familiar with it, but if you map out the obstacles and things that are going to get in the way, that can be really helpful, because we like to think our goal is just going to be this straight shot to the finish line. It's really not. There's going to be obstacles and things along the way. So the more you can prepare for those and be ready and have contingency plans and things like that, and be open to failure, the more you're going to be able to bounce back and continue on that journey without taking severe hits.
Yeah, what do you have to say to people who want to do this, but are afraid of what it might look like. I guess a better way to put that is like if you take this approach to sports or to business or to insert anything, you're going to be seen as kind of insane. Just because we talk about it, we want people to do it, but then we don't apply it. It's one of those principles.
Mhm.
What is your little word of encouragement here to people who want to, again, for sports, take coaches' advice, be competitive, but also not attach their self identity, like you called it, to this feedback?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. It's something that I've struggled with a long time. I think acceptance, back to the sphere of control, is one of the best ways to go about it. And so my mom uses this example with some of her clients, but if you picture a hula hoop around you right now, the hula hoop and inside the hula hoop is really your most of what you can control. You can influence things to a certain extent outside of that. I can throw a ball at the wall and influence that. But direct control, I really only have over the ball until it leaves my hand. There is that gray area. And then further away, there's not much I can control. At the end of the day, what's inside your hula hoop is mainly your thoughts, behaviors, actions, attitudes, things like that. And so if I'm getting feedback from a coach, what do I have control at? It's not what he's saying. It's not what other people think about what he's saying. It's not what other people think about what I'm doing if I'm applying that as feedback. But I do have the ability to take this as things I'm doing wrong or things that I can work on. And it's a very slight language shift there. But the more you can make that language shift, the more it's going to give yourself achievable things to go work on, practice that ultimately lead to that growth and development. And so the question becomes, are you more concerned with what people think about you trying to get better or getting better itself? If it winds up being that getting better, oh well, I can't control what they think. And at the very least, you could even have conversations with them or incorporate them in the growth process. Maybe you let your teammates know what you're working on and you ask for feedback from them ahead of time. That way they're not just looking at the end state and saying, oh yeah, that was miserable, but they can give you pointers on how you're doing, what maybe they think you can do better, and more advice, more perspectives, things like that.
Yeah, a little growth together, heal together, community. I mean, you're already in the same community anyway if you're on the same team. Even if it's individual sport, you're both going through the same process. I think, yeah, a little accountability partner maybe. But I want to kind of go backwards and exist in the space of the second kind of way. I want to take the conversation from earlier when we were talking about Kobe Bryant and enjoying the process and the routine and all that. I'll give you an analogy. We'll see if it sticks. I should just call this podcast Analogies with Caleb at this point because that's what they exist. This is like half of the fun here. Too much of something is never good, and we know that. Even too much water has very adverse effects. The analogy I like and appreciate, I've kind of made it into my own, changed a few things to avoid plagiarism, if you will. No, it's not that serious. If you're a kid in a candy shop, right, and you're walking around and you just love candy, like say Hershey's chocolate is your absolute favorite. You buy one of them, oh, it's so good. Then the next day you go back and get another, oh, it's so good. Then the next day you go back and get 2, 3, until you're eating 10 a day. Well, number one, Ted might have a pickup line for you and be like, whoa, I heard a fat kid running. Like you might be that kid at some point. Or you might be like me and end up with 8 cavities by the time you're 16.
Mm-hmm.
All right. When does too much routine, too much success, if you will, because the more you fall into routine, sometimes the more success you see, become dangerous to your mental well-being? We'll leave physical out of it for complexity's sake. I know analogy is crazy that I just used, but I think if you can picture it, it'll be good.
No, I think that's an accurate analogy. I'm going to tie this to autonomy support in general. I think that one of the common conceptualizations that we have of autonomy is freedom and choice. And then when you hear autonomy is good, you're like, freedom and choice is good. And it's not entirely incorrect, but I will add a little nuance to the definition of autonomy, at least for the research that I like. How autonomy typically gets defined will be endorsement of the decisions that you're doing. And as long as you have that, like mentally, you might be okay. With the candy store, there is a responsibility when you're a kid, especially, but even of friends as you grow up and still parents and other figures, where you can endorse a decision that doesn't completely come from you. If I'm a parent again, or if I'm a coach and I give kids complete autonomy in practice, that's probably not going to go well. That's going to be anarchy. They're going to be kicking balls at each other's heads. If it's soccer practice, it's not going to be great.
It'll be
And
fun
so
to
there's
watch, but you might get fired.
right. It's like when you ref like the 5 and 6 year old kids, and you're like,
Yep.
I miss playing soccer like this. But there's a benefit to left and right limits. And that doesn't mean you have to come down in a very hard way on what people are doing or be mean about it. But there is a difference between an informational, hey, this is too much, this is too little, that provides an optimal challenge and range for people to operate in, and telling them what to do. I think there's a nice middle ground there. And so a different study that they ran, I'm going to blank on the authors. I think it's Ryan and Connell, but it might be Koestner. It's something from the 80s. But what they found and what they worked on was, let's take some kids, and I'm going to translate this into sports terms, but let's take some kids at the soccer practice, okay? And we're just going to give them instructions. We're going to have the coach's standard, which is going to be neutral for us in the language that he presents the things to the kids. This is what we're doing. No fancy terms that are either controlling or informational, just this is what it is. We're also going to have a controlling group. And so when you guys are doing the drill, you have to go touch that cone. You cannot run kind of out of line, stay on the trail. Make sure you pick up after yourselves. You should be looking out for this, that, and this when you're doing the drill. Very strict style of just explaining the task. And then also an informational limits where, hey, there's going to be people that are doing this drill after you, your meaningful rationale. So please make sure that it's nice and tidy for when the next people come up, and you kind of explain why it is what you're doing. What they find time and time again, not just in the 80s, but even in the current research, is that the informational group is more creative and has more enjoyment in the task than the controlling group. And so if it's a kid in the candy store, setting those left and right limits, but setting them with rationale tends to be the best way to go about it. At the end of the day, if the kid still wants candy, that's either you have a conversation with the kid or the kid gets candy. It's kind of how I view it. You know, water, right? But by setting those limits and giving that information, you really do as much as you can as an outside source.
Mm. And that can be applied to the self in the terms of, I mean, for the kid in the candy store, it's got to be like, we're not going to get a candy bar every day, but I appreciate that you enjoy the little things in life. Like you could tell the kid this, and it's the attention to detail and the little language shift. I mean, language is so powerful, and yes, you could argue sticks and stones, that whole theory. I mean, that again, we could spend another 50 minutes talking about that. But for the purposes of where this conversation is going, the intention to language and how you present information to yourself, but in this case, 8-year-old Caleb in the candy store, we appreciate that you enjoy chocolate. Maybe that's a little thing in life for you. Like it's a privilege to eat chocolate again. Perspective is huge. Let's get it once a week so that way you can continue to learn to enjoy that. So that way you don't become all these things that you can be to caffeine and sugar, and you don't end up obese or overweight when you can control it. Obviously there's extenuating circumstances and health conditions where people can't control it. Again, another 50-minute topic. But when back to your so complex, back to your spinning hula hoop, when it's in your control, you present the language to the kids. Can you present this language to yourself so that, again, when you're presenting it to the kid, it's appreciate the little things. We love that you love chocolate, but we're going to get 1 week so you don't fall into this routine or habit of eating it too much, getting the cavities, becoming overweight, all this negative stuff. Once a week is a better routine. Can you present this information to yourself? So like, hey, you don't need to go to the gym 7 days a week to be fit. Actually, you can get hurt doing it. How do you present that information to the self?
I think it goes kind of into your understanding curiosity. I keep going back to understanding, but curiosity as well. And so if you understand where you want to go and then you have steps along the way. So you want a certain fitness goal. Maybe it's put on 25 pounds in the gym. You're like, okay, I'm just going to grind the gym, understanding and asking yourself, what are the pros and cons to this? What is the big picture outcomes look like when I'm doing this? And back to what you said at the beginning, being intentional about setting that plan up is going to be huge. I think you can, to a degree, promote better self-talk within yourself. And so if you're telling yourself you should do this, you must do this, you ought to do this, you're creating pressure. If I feel like I should do things and I'm telling myself you should go do your laundry, am I going to want to go do my laundry anymore? Probably not. I'm probably going to feel anxious and guilty about it if I keep saying you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And so thinking about it instead as, I have a lot of laundry, it's piled up, and it would be very beneficial for me to do this the next week. How motivating is that? Probably not at the beginning, especially if you don't like laundry, but that is a little bit nicer way to do it so that you can find a little bit more value in whatever it is you're doing. So taking some curiosity to say, what are the benefits to doing this laundry? What are the consequences if I don't do this laundry? And being nice to yourself and how you talk. One of the best phrases that I've heard is, if I talk to you like you talk to you, we would not be friends. So why do you talk to yourself like that?
College can be a roller coaster, but Xant's got your back. First session, absolutely free. After that, just $25. Easy on the pocket, heavy on support. Stress, burnout, addiction, or trauma. Xant's expert coaches are here for you. Download the app, kick stress to the curb, and own your college journey. Your mental health, your way. Xant. Download and thrive today.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that term before, but I appreciate your perspective on that, because what I took away from that is, when you approach any situation yourself, we'll leave the kid in the candy store behind, but you got to take the blinders off at first. Again, see as many outcomes as you can. We can't see them all. That's impossible. And the outcomes that you're looking at in the beginning when your blinders are off might not even be the ones that you're seeing at the end, or that you accomplish. But when you fitness, again, 25 pounds in the gym, you got to take those blinders off and say, okay, how do I get there? Well, I have to eat. I can spend 7 days in the gym if I rest every single time I'm out of the gym. You just have to figure out as many possibilities as you can. And then once you try a few, and then once you find one that works for you, give yourself that grace period. It's different timeline for everybody. Then you put those blinders back on and say, okay, I'm going to grind and grind and grind and grind and grind, fall into that routine. And then the closer you get to your goal, have checkpoints. Take those blinders off. Do I need to switch it? What's going on around me? Is my hula hoop bumping into anything? Again, for the hula hoop reference. Then if not, go again. It's so important to continue to have direction and detail, but also realize that what you're doing could be harmful to yourself, could be harmful to someone else, or beneficial, right? If it's going to be beneficial to you and yourself, you want to take those blinders off and say, okay, if I try this, am I getting worse or better results? If the answer is worse, go back to what you were doing. I think that holds a lot of value. And again, to your laundry point, sometimes it's just purely that I run out of underwear and I just got to do laundry because I have no other choice. I think that happens in the personal journey as well. Like, sometimes there's just no pain-free option, right? Like, I don't want to do my laundry to the point where I run out of underwear. Don't do the sniff test anymore. For all my college guys out there, we all know what the sniff test is. We'll leave that out for all intensive purposes. But sometimes in life, there's just no pain-free options. And like, you can either just have the pain of keep putting yourself down, telling yourself, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. Or you can take that leap of faith and temporarily feel the pain of folding the laundry, maybe spilling bleach on your hands, whatever it is. You can choose the temporary pain, if you will, if we're considering everything as the non-painful option. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's really fascinating. And I think there is another piece of acceptance there, right? If you are out of underwear, you need to accept that this is probably a good idea and understand why that is a good idea, because you are out of underwear. And how do you drive that acceptance becomes a really fascinating question. I would say you just practice it, but you can probably dive in a little bit more there. And it comes in different forms. when we go back to kind of something you don't want to do, I had one coworker whose strategy for doing things she did not want to do was just 3, 2, 1, do it. And it works for you if you can accept it on that 3, 2, 1, do it. But if you're just going to keep making that number bigger and bigger so that you don't have to do it, we might want to find another route. And so there's a personal component there. I used to try, on 10, I'm going to get up out of bed this morning. And then 10 would turn into 100 and I'm just back asleep. And so that didn't work for me. But what is going to help you come to terms with and accept that is massive. Especially, you talked about coming with a plan and having points and checkpoints where you take those blinders off. Once you take the blinders off, can you accept if you're not at where you want to be? Or can you accept some negative self-feedback or feedback from other places? Are you willing to take that and use it rather than shy away from it and not want to hear it? Which is another interesting piece that I think ties right in with acceptance.
Yeah, and Canadian physician Gabor Mate, I think I probably butchered that, depending on what language you speak, but I think everyone knows who I'm talking about who follows psychology and physiology. But he takes a stab at this, and he says it way better than I do. So if you want to take a listen to it, you can Google Gabor Mate. Again, I apologize if for whatever reason he's listening to this, but you can Google him and figure out his viewpoints. But I appreciate how he just has ripped the Band-Aid off, kind of like your 3-2-1 friend. When you know both outcomes suck, pick one that you think is going to suck less for you or whoever's involved. If it's your choice to pick one for the kid in the candy store, for lack of better analogies, like if they can't make the decision for themselves, and then to tie it back to the beginning, make that decision right. Don't spend the time stressing about it, worrying about it. You're going to have those moments, and that's just called being human. You're going to have, if you're 5 miles into the race, right? For all my runners who are here to support Nick, first of all, y'all are crazy. Don't know why you do it for fun, but I guess we do it in soccer. We just put a ball in front of our feet and make it an excuse and say we're not running. Anyways, side tangent. He says just rip the Band-Aid off. 3, 2, 1, go. You're on mile 5 of a half marathon, 13 miles. What, you got like 7 left to go, 8 left to go. You can either stop and say, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of the physical pain, whatever, maybe be disappointed because I failed, and then spend some time worrying about, oh, I should have finished. Or you can finish because you trained, you might not hit the time you want, and then spend some time feeling some physical pain, maybe some emotional distress, some tiredness. Both choices seem pretty dang crappy to me, although I do start to enjoy running now that I don't have sports readily available to me. Well, I do, that I choose not to play them. Don't spend time worrying about what you didn't do. You can think, okay, I didn't finish the race. What do I have to do next time to finish the race? Again, all these theories intertwine that we're talking about, which is why this topic is so beautiful, and I'm glad you're on. Or if you finish the race, you can say, why did I feel like not finishing the race? What did I do to power myself through? Was it positive self-talk? Was it the reverse? Was it negative self-talk? If you don't finish this, blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's the answer, you got some more diving to do. Again, I'm sorry, you got some more diving to do. But do you think that 3, 2, 1, rip the Band-Aid off, more beneficial, less beneficial? Is there any evidence that you've come across, or is it just purely situational?
I would say as a cop-out, there's a situational aspect to it, but especially if the situation is that you're struggling to take action, that can be effective in helping you take action. There are situations where action doesn't need to be taken. And so, for example, one of the biggest things I think when you are taking people's perspective, and you did a really good job at kind of validating this with the kid in the candy store example, is when you take somebody's perspective, you benefit and they benefit from validating that without a sense of you have to do this or that. Right now we're back to that controlling sphere. There is the option of no change, and that is okay. There's some really interesting studies on tobacco usage and what gets people to stop. This is a really hard addiction to kick. They've actually done better with long-term abstinence, 24 months, no tobacco, with long-time smokers in just exploring their values and what they think about smoking without ever telling them to stop smoking than handing them a pamphlet and saying, this is bad for you. Odds are they understand that it's bad for them. Odds are that people understand that they might be better off doing one thing or another. But by pressuring them into a change that they're not quite ready for, you create a new obstacle and maybe even resentment towards yourself when you're pushing that out on them. I think is fascinating. And so kind of acknowledging that no change is an option, I think is huge. And I lost my train of thought. What was the original question again?
No, it was 3, 2, 1. Rip it off. Is that situational? Is it more beneficial, less beneficial? I mean, I think you kind of answered it there, but if you had something else, let's exist here for a moment.
I had somewhere else that I was going to go, but I forgot what that was. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, it's all right. Well, no change might be the answer. No, that is interesting though, because I never thought of it from the standpoint of just, again, this is a lot about spheres of influence and personal control as much as it is, or I shouldn't say personal control, personal development, growth, and personal realization as it is helping others, right? Once you get yourself down, then you can exist outside of your hula hoop. Then you can start to be the instructor. Then you take on these roles of leadership, and you need to, I argue, to a certain extent, feel and experience. Like, there's a reason that a lot of leaders are 60 years old. There just is. Like, in all the Disney movies, there's a reason why the old wise owl or Rafiki is old. Like, they've experienced life, and yes, they're cute little animals, whatever, Disney. But I think it's interesting that we can do this with ourselves. We can tell ourselves, oh, you need to go to the gym. You need to go to the gym. New Year's resolutions, huge one. Everyone wants to do a New Year's resolution. No one wants to hear about it, right? There's a reason gyms exist, and I think it's 2 months of the year. I think it's January, February is where they make their most money, and then everyone's gone. But you can have someone breathing down your neck saying, you need to go to the gym. You need to go to the gym. You need to go to the gym, blah, blah, blah. If you don't go to the gym, you're a failure, X, Y, Z. You can do that to yourself. You can say, oh, I don't go to the gym. I don't go to the gym. I don't study for a test. I don't save my money, this, that. Like, people who spend money know they should probably save it. People that don't go to the gym know they should go to the gym. People who go to the gym too much know they need a rest. We all are, to some degree, aware of our positive and negative traits. And I'm very fascinated on the extremes. When is hyper awareness just beneficial for you or harmful? I mean, it goes back to empathy, in my opinion, but I'm curious of your thoughts, and then I have a couple questions for you at the end here, but hyper awareness is complex.
So I think hyper awareness is super interesting, especially when we talk about like attention control. And one of the most integral pieces, and this was actually regain my train of thought on where I was hoping to go to. I think it fits in really nicely here. There is a benefit to reflection, and there is a benefit to planning things out in the terms of future or past, right? So past being reflection, future being that planning. When you are doing a task or you are in the middle of a performance and need to get things done, in a sense, it's not great to be in either of those zones. And so a really interesting connection for this would be like flow state, right? Flow state, ultimately, you're locked in on the present moment. Everything feels great. It's phenomenal. You can't really get there focusing on the past or focusing on the future. And so tying that to a sphere of control, you don't have control over the past. You don't really have control over the future. You might be able to influence the future, but you are right here, right now. And the degree to which you can accept that and let go of those other two, which is another interesting piece, the degree to which you can make the most optimal changes for yourself. And so another, like, these are all kind of coming from the same guy, but a quote from my buddy, also Caleb, is, if your body is here and your head is not, then you're nowhere.
Let that sit for a second. Let that exist in the here and now. And what's interesting is every single person that listens to this is going to take it differently. So I'm not going to ask you to follow up on that. I'm going to let them exist with that thought in the present moment, because that'll be powerful enough. And if it's not, it's powerful enough for me. But I want to finish here by kind of giving you the floor to just, I don't know, maybe let us in on your own life and when these practices worked for you, when they didn't work for you, if you're still working through them. Because I know personally, a lot of the practices we've talked about, I've tried. Some work, some don't. But again, that goes back to intentionality, awareness, the space around me, the space which I take up, and understanding that I take up a different space in everyone's life. That's a whole nother topic, but that's something I've been trying to work through in order to figure out how to best take care of myself. I'm trying to understand, okay, who am I to my mom? Who am I to my girlfriend? Who am I to my brother? Who am I to myself? Who am I to my religion? Like I took my typical why am I doing this to wait, I know why I'm doing this. Who am I to each person I'm doing this for?
Mm-hmm.
For you, for these practices and principles we're talking about, are you at the point of why am I doing this? Or are you at the point of, okay, who am I to who I'm doing this for?
I think a little bit of both. I think that it's really important to have that understanding of like who are you doing this for, and also why are you doing what you're doing. And I think especially with growth, is there really a point where you don't think you can continue to grow? I would argue no. I think similar this the idea that the smartest person in the room doesn't think they're the smartest person in the room, right? There's always this love of learning or curiosity, and that might not be your value, which is okay. But the idea that you can be 1% better each day, something along those lines, tends to be something most people can accept. And I think playing to your strengths is really big. One of the things that we'll give out in one of our courses at work is the VIA, and it's a character strengths test that is run by the guys down at UPenn, guys and girls. But what it does, it's 240 questions. It takes about 30 minutes, but if people are interested in taking it, it'll comprise a list of your top values in actions. And so this does not mean what you value most will come up, but it does mean what you tend to do most often in your daily life will be reflected. What traits are you demonstrating? And there's no bad values on the list. Again, there's a shadow side. You can overuse these, or humor can get you in trouble. It's humor and playfulness for them, but you can also use those to your benefits, and you can lead through your character strengths. For me, I'm a very curious person. So when I teach people, it's not very lecture focused. I don't like slides very much. I would rather explore what people's thoughts are and then connect those after I get them. But I like that exploratory style a little bit more. And one of the big moments that kind of led to that was a mindfulness class. It's way back to when you were talking about COVID. When COVID hit, I was TAing the course on motivation, and it was very discussion based. And thankfully, the whole class is about applying principles. We were like, how do we maintain motivation? And how do we sit down and make sure that students are engaged virtually? Because we are scrapping all of our plans. We don't have a playbook for this. That has stuck with me, especially in the virtual workspace today. How do you actually get there? And a lot of it comes from just the very simple taking perspectives. When I hop on a Zoom call, how much am I interested in the other people on the call or pushing out information? Because we don't learn very well from lectures, especially if we don't think that we're valued. We don't trust whoever's giving the lecture. And so making an emphasis on that is huge. And grounding yourself in the present moment was another class that I had taken the year before and was still writing the benefits of. It's like a meditation into the moment class. Not saying that you need to do meditation by any means, but one thing my cousin always says is, how many breaths did you notice today? How many times were you cognizant of being right here? And a lot of times that hits me when I'm driving. How many breaths have I noticed? I don't know, but I can notice some right now. And that usually recenters me a little bit. And that's allowed me to be more reflective, tying it back to your question, and understand the whys of what I'm doing. And the more that I do that, the more I'm aware of it in the moment. The biggest thing that I've struggled with, and the one that I currently still struggle with a lot, is acceptance of my own mistakes, and that truthfully I don't have any impact on what people think. And so I was at a wedding in December. It was a New Year's Eve wedding. It was really fun. All of the Rochester cross country people were out at it, and so it was a little bit of a reunion of sorts as well. And before the wedding started, we're walking to our seats, and they had like candles on the ground, but the candles were at the top of like a little jar filled with water. And not paying attention, just following the people in front of me, I kicked one of the candles over. And I was like, oh no, like I just spilled water everywhere. We're right before they're about to do the ceremony. Instant panic. Dang it. And normally that is something that would sit with me the entire time of the wedding, I am just, I'm beating myself up. I'm anxious. I'm like, what are people looking over my shoulder? That hyper awareness that you were talking about, very, very much a situation in which that would happen. And thankfully, this time I was able to catch myself after I did it. I was like, look, there is nothing that I can do about it now. What I can do and what I can control is making sure that, one, I offer to help clean it up any way that I can help. Let's take responsibility for this and acknowledge that it was a failure on my part, or was a mistake that I wasn't planning on making, maybe. But what can I do in the present moment to get better and do that? And so a lot of my journey now is doing that and standing up for like my own beliefs instead of biting my tongue, not in a way where I want to come after people and attack them and tell them their views are wrong, but how can I engage in a healthy conflict that promotes both of our perspectives, validates both of our perspectives, and I can accept that even if I don't win a conversation or an argument, that's okay. Like the journey, that sharing of perspectives is the important part, and respecting that other person's and them respecting mine. And so I would say that's kind of really big with the who am I to other people. I want to be my authentic self, and I want to be aware of like why it is what I'm doing, what I am doing, and kind of just phrase things in a way where I can promote conversation and growth for both people, even if we don't come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, I think the overarching themes of this conversation have been direction and redirection in every single thing we've talked about. You have to understand what direction you're going. If you don't feel like it's the correct direction, can you take that negative energy, in our opinions, the hyper awareness, the toxic empathy, the confusion, the if you forget who you're doing it for, the falling into the routine trap, the anything, the kid in the candy shop. If you're going down that path, can you redirect it? Be aware. Oh, I just knocked over the candle. Crap. I can panic. I can panic a little bit and then help. Or I can, yep, sorry, it was me. Don't slip when you're coming down the aisle, bride and groom. I'll literally take off my coat and wipe the floor for you. I didn't mean to make the attention about me right before your moment, whatever. That is a time when humor might be beneficial. But direction, redirection, a healthy level of self-awareness, a healthy level of acceptance. And I go back to healthy because and that's subjective. It's different for everybody. My healthy level is totally different than yours, I'm sure. Vice versa. Yours is different than Matt Rank with the blinker. Ever since you said his name, I'm just thinking, like, where the heck is he? Probably in a balcony somewhere in New York City. But redirection, direction, growth, being your authentic self. And I want to touch on that last point really quick before I do ask you the one final question here. It goes back to you have to know the opposite thing to understand what you believe in. You can't just say, I think country music is the best genre without listening to other genres of music. That's the moment where your blinders are like this and you're not exposed to anything outside of your hula hoop. Again, I'm using like 6 analogies in one, but I think you get the point. Like you have to let your hula hoop bump into the wall to understand the space you're existing in. And you're like, oh, maybe this room is too small for me. Let's step into the next room. That can be applied to any facet of life. And I think that's a very important point that you brought up, whether you meant to or not, that you need to understand yourself as much as the concepts, the people, the ideologies, everything in life, right? And I'm not saying you have to go be those things, right? You just have to understand that they exist, be respectful without changing who you are too much. Because sometimes, like you said, no action is better than action. But sometimes if you are consistently bumping the wall with your hula hoop, you don't want to punch a hole in the wall. You just simply want to step to the side. But right. I want to ask you this last question that we ask all of our guests. And I just love it. It's been so fun to hear everyone's answers. So I'm very curious of yours because we do have a relationship, but I don't know the answer to this question. So if someone listening to this podcast, well, I guess I'll just ask it how I normally ask it instead of getting confusing. If there's one person that you would give a hug right now that has got this far in the podcast and you're just like, you need a hug. It's coming from me to you. Who is it and why? You can give first name, last initial. You can give us a firstie, lastie, whatever you're feeling. But this person gets a hug from Nick.
Yeah, so that's a phenomenal question. I'm gonna go with the first one that came into my head, but there were three. um,
You
the
can give them
first one,
all. You get a lot of hugs, long arms.
yeah, more hugs to go around. Um, One of the first one that popped in the head is a teammate of mine whose name is Meredith. And one of the reasons that Meredith popped in mind is when you were talking about that being your authentic self is an important thing, and being aware of who you are is an important thing. My mind instantly went to those people who are so attuned to others, right? And they would give you the shirt off your back to make your day, even if it meant ruining theirs. And she's someone who I think is very much that person. That's not to say she isn't, aware in her authentic self. I think she very much is.
For sure,
But I
yeah.
think those people are so important. And I think that, having the ability to truly be you and support other people for who they are, regardless of if they're doing good or bad things, but just supporting that person is a really big thing. And I think she does a great job of that. And so that was the first one that came to mind. And then the second two would be Mike, the guy who I do the podcast with. Um, he loves asking questions. And this was where my head was going, like similar. He loves asking questions and he loves other people talking. He doesn't often open up about himself as much. And when you were giving your example of being yourself, how can you be your best self if you're always focused on other people? Again, Mike, not saying that about him, but I think he demonstrates somebody who would rather ask a question than answer a question. I think both are beneficial. And so that was the second one that came to mind along the same path as Meredith. And then the last one, good old Matt Rank. Matt Rank just
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it.
we it's going to be a time. We just actually decided that we're going to go to another music festival, which are not Matt's favorites. However, he does love a weekend with the boys. And so right now it is myself and then Elvis are going to go to DC. We bought the tickets. We haven't figured out any Airbnbs or anything like that, but I'm stoked for that. And I think especially on these weekend nights, I'm just wondering if he's off work because the kid works 12 hours in finance. So I hope that he's home. I hope he's enjoying a nice, he likes LaCroix. So I hope he's enjoying a nice LaCroix somewhere, staying hydrated.
Nice hug and a LaCroix. And if he's not, he's going to get one when he sees you. So,
Yeah.
Matt, if you're crunching numbers for some multimillionaire right now, at least you get a LaCroix and a hug coming from Nick. So you better take the weekend off to go to this music festival. But there you have it. Thank you for sharing this space. I know it stinks that it's virtual, but we're all doing the best we can right now. I do want to give you the moment, though, to shout out Mend the Mind. You've been so humble about it. Haven't really brought it up. Where can we find the work you're doing? And maybe where can we find one of these, what I'm going to call a reality check test that you mentioned earlier, the 240 questions? Where can we find that and your wonderful podcast and community?
Yeah. So I'll give you the link to the podcast, and it's on Spotify. It's on Apple Music. I believe the platform pushes out to most of them through Riverside. We post the YouTube with video as well. And so if you search Mend the Mind on YouTube, again, all these links will be on that Linktree, but it should pop up. I think even if you search it on Spotify, it's one of the first results. We've got an Instagram. I believe it's at Mend the Mind or at mendthemind.co. And same thing with TikTok. So we're trying to get more of the short form videos out there, but we have been slacking the last couple of weeks. So we'll get that together. But yeah, no, it's been a great opportunity to get on. And as far as the reality checks, I remember mentioning the TED Talk. I remember mentioning a couple different articles that I can send you as well. And then lastly, the VIA survey. If you
That's what it's
type
called.
in
VIA. Okay.
VIA character strengths, it should pop up, and it's going to be on the website. I want to say is Authentic Happiness.
Okay.
Yeah.
It should just be called realitycheck.com. Don't go to realitycheck.com. I have no idea what that is, but that's what it should be called. Authentic Happiness is what we're looking for.
Yeah. So if you do, it's Authentic Happiness, and I'll send this to you as well, but authentichappiness.sas.upenn.edu. That is the main page for them. And I believe you can just go to the questionnaire and take the free version. There is a paid version. Full disclaimer, they probably wouldn't like that I said this. The paid version just gives you the percentages on what your scores are, the free version will still give you 1 to 24. So I would just do that one. But
yeah, I mean, if you're fascinated about it and you want to subscribe for more, no one's going to stop you. But
right.
if you want to just get that baseline reality check that we mentioned, we all like a few free things in our life. So there you have it. Nick Davis, I'm gonna give you a little catchphrase here. Be kind and mend the mind. We're gonna leave you with that. And again, thank you for joining us, sharing your perspective on things, and really being your authentic self. I think it's been kind of neat to. I see you outside of this aspect so much, but you don't really change. So that was cool for me. So I appreciate you. And if we were to give out a hug at the end of this episode, it would be going to you. So thank you one last time, Nick.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.